Watching from across the room, billionaire CEO Victoria Sterling realized she had just found her salvation. Her eyes were fixed on a man who, instead of screaming or crying at the loaded shotgun pointed at his face, was calmly sliding a half-eaten grilled cheese across the diner table to shield his bay-year-old son. Music. The rain in Chicago that Tuesday night was relentless, hammering against the fogged glass of O'Connor's Diner on 8th Avenue like handfuls of gravel. Victoria Harper, the Bay Muy Bon-year-old CEO of Harper Global, sat in the darkest corner booth nursing a lukewarm black coffee. Stripped of her usual Armani power suits, she wore a simple gray cashmere sweater and a faded trench coat. For the first time in some months, she was entirely alone. She had explicitly ordered her private security detail to remain 3 blocks away. She needed an hour to breathe, to escape the suffocating reality of a multi-billion-dollar hostile takeover that was threatening to tear her grandfather's logistics empire apart. 2 booths down from her sat a stark contrast to her world of corporate warfare. A man in his early 30s, wearing a worn denim jacket over a faded mechanic's shirt, was celebrating what looked like a heartbreakingly modest occasion. Across from him sat a young boy, no older than 7, wearing a paper crown from a fast food joint. The man had ordered 1 slice of cherry pie and stuck a single crooked candle into its center. "Make a wish, Noah," the man said, his voice a low, warm rumble that barely carried over the ambient hum of the diner's refrigerators. Victoria watched them subtly. She noticed the frayed cuffs of the man's jacket, the exhaustion etched deep into the corners of his eyes, and the gentle, almost fiercely protective way he looked at his son. His name tag, barely visible under the diner's flickering neon sign, read Ethan. At exactly Chinzo Muy Bon Futoy, the bell above the diner's door didn't just ring, it shattered. The heavy glass door was kicked open with such force that it slammed against the interior wall, cracking the plaster. 2 men burst into the diner, bringing the freezing rain and a wave of raw terror with them. They wore dark hoodies, ski masks pulled tightly over their faces, and they moved with the erratic, jerky energy of men fueled by desperation and cheap adrenaline. "Nobody moves. Shut up, shut up, shut up." The taller of the 2 screamed, racking the pump of a sawed-off shotgun. The unmistakable clack-clack echoed through the small space, freezing the blood of the 6 patrons inside. The second man, shorter but heavier, pulled a snub-nosed revolver and sprinted straight for the counter. He grabbed the elderly owner, Mr. O'Connor, by the collar of his apron, pressing the cold steel barrel against the old man's temple. "Open the register. Pop the drawer, old man, or I paint the grill with your brains." Panic erupted. A waitress dropped a tray of ceramic mugs, the crash sounding like a gunshot. 2 teenage girls in the front booth began to shriek, diving under their table. Victoria's heart seized in her chest. Her breath caught in her throat as a cold, paralyzing dread washed over her. She instinctively slid down in her booth, her hand trembling as it hovered over her purse, where a panic button connected to her security team lay hidden. But if she moved too fast, she knew the man with the shotgun would see her. But what caught Victoria's eye, overriding her own terror, was the booth 2 rows down. Ethan didn't dive under the table. He didn't scream. He didn't even flinch when the shotgun was racked. In a single fluid motion that defied the chaos erupting around him, Ethan reached across the table, his hand clamped gently but firmly over Noah's shoulder. "Hey, buddy," Ethan whispered, his voice impossibly steady, cutting through the boy's rising panic. "Remember the statue game? We're playing it right now. Freeze frame. Eyes on my chest. Don't look anywhere else." Noah whimpered, his eyes wide with fear, but he nodded, burying his face into his father's chest. Ethan shifted his body weight. He didn't cower. He strategically repositioned himself, turning his broad shoulders into a human shield that completely blocked the boy from the robber's line of sight. He kept his hands flat on the table, palms down, completely visible. The taller robber, hyperventilating behind his mask, paced the aisle, swinging the shotgun wildly from the crying teenagers to Victoria's booth, and finally stopping at Ethan. "Hey, you!" the robber barked, leveling the shotgun directly at Ethan's face. The hollow barrel hovered less than bay feet from his eyes. "Empty your pockets. Put the wallet on the table. Now!" Victoria stopped breathing. She braced herself for the blast. She expected the father to beg, to plead for his son's life, or to panic. Instead, Ethan slowly looked up. His expression was a mask of utter chilling calm. His heart rate didn't seem to have spiked at all. He looked at the shotgun, then up at the erratic, sweating eyes visible through the holes of the ski mask. "Okay," Ethan said. His voice wasn't just calm, it was authoritative, emitting a strange frequency that seemed to forcefully lower the temperature in the room. "I'm reaching into my back left pocket, slow, 2 fingers, just the wallet." He telegraphed every micro movement. Victoria, watching from the shadows, realized she was witnessing something extraordinary. This wasn't the frozen stillness of shock. This was the calculated, hyper-aware stillness of an apex predator evaluating a threat. The diner smelled of burnt coffee, ozone, and wet wool. The taller robber snatched Ethan's worn leather wallet off the table. He ripped it open, his frustration boiling over. "There's time to lie in here. Are you kidding me? $8?" The robber slammed the butt of the shotgun onto the table, barely an inch from Noah's trembling hand. The boy let out a sharp cry. Victoria watched Ethan's jaw clench, the only physical tell of the rage simmering beneath his stoic exterior. But his voice remained deadpan, steady. "That's all I have," Ethan said. "Look at my boots, man. Do I look like I'm hiding offshore accounts? The register has the night's take. Take it and go. The cops run a patrol on 8th Avenue every hour. You have about 3 minutes before a cruiser rolls by." The robber hesitated, glancing nervously at the front window. Ethan was planting seeds of urgency, manipulating the man's internal clock. It was a masterclass in psychological de-escalation. But then the situation spiraled. The shorter robber at the register had finished stuffing the cash into a duffel bag. As he turned to leave, his eyes swept over the back booths and landed squarely on Victoria. The dim light caught the edge of her wrist as she absent-mindedly clutched her coat. "Hey, Mason, hold up," the shorter robber said, his voice dropping into a greedy, sinister register. He walked slowly toward Victoria's booth, kicking a fallen chair out of his way. "Look what we have here." Victoria's blood ran cold. She tried to pull her sleeve down, but it was too late. The robber leaned over her table, his revolver pointed carelessly at her chest. "That's a Patek Philippe Grand Complication, pink gold. I know watches, lady. That's $100,000 on your wrist." He squinted, leaning in closer, invading her personal space. The smell of stale tobacco and unwashed clothes made her gag. Suddenly, the man's eyes widened in recognition. "Wait a second. I know you," he breathed out. "I saw your face on the cover of Forbes at the dentist's office. You're that shipping chick. Harper, you're Victoria Harper." "You're mistaken," Victoria lied, her voice shaking despite her best efforts. "Shut up," he barked, grabbing her wrist with brutal force. "Mason, forget the register. We just hit the lottery. We take her with us. The ransom on this one is worth nummuitru. Easy." Victoria fought back, planting her feet, but the man yanked her out of the booth. She stumbled, crashing to her knees on the linoleum floor. The taller robber, Mason, swung his shotgun toward her, his panic now replaced with chaotic excitement. "Get her up! Let's go! Out the back!" Mason yelled. Victoria squeezed her eyes shut. This is it, she thought. They're going to put me in a trunk and I'm never going to see the sun again. Her security detail was too far away. The panic button was still in her purse on the seat. She was entirely defenseless. "Let her go!" The words cut through the diner like a physical blade. They were quiet, but laced with a lethal, absolute certainty. Both robbers froze, turning their heads. Ethan had stood up. He had gently pushed Noah under the heavy oak table, completely out of the line of fire. Ethan stepped out of his booth into the narrow aisle. He wasn't taking a fighting stance. He just stood there, his hands resting loosely at his sides. But his posture had changed. The tired, broke father was gone. In his place stood a man radiating an overwhelming, almost suffocating aura of danger. "I said, let her go," Ethan repeated, taking one slow, deliberate step forward. "Back off, hero," Mason screamed, swinging the shotgun directly at Ethan's chest. "I will blow you in half. I swear to God." "No, you won't," Ethan said, taking another step. He was now 100 feet away. "Because your safety is still engaged, Mason. You racked the slide to scare people, but you never flipped the catch on the trigger guard. You're a rookie." Mason glanced down at his weapon in sheer panic. A fatal high-second distraction. Ethan exploded. He didn't move like a brawler. He moved like a ghost. Victoria couldn't even process the sequence of events. Ethan closed the gap in a fraction of a second. His left hand slapped the shotgun barrel upward, pointing it at the ceiling. Simultaneously, his right hand struck the crook of Mason's elbow with devastating precision. A sickening pop echoed through the diner as Mason's arm hyperextended. The shotgun clattered to the floor. Before the shorter robber holding Victoria could even raise his revolver, Ethan pivoted. He grabbed the heavy, thick ceramic sugar dispenser off a nearby table and hurled it like a fastball. It struck the second robber square in the bridge of the nose. The man dropped like a stone, releasing Victoria and crashing into the counter, out cold. Mason, clutching his broken arm, screamed in agony, falling to his knees. The diner was suddenly plunged into dead silence, save for the heavy rain beating against the windows and Mason's pathetic whimpers. The entire engagement had lasted less than Bond's seconds. Victoria, still on her knees, stared up at Ethan in absolute shock. Her heart was hammering violently against her ribs. She looked at the two incapacitated men, then up at Ethan. He wasn't even breathing hard. He calmly walked over, kicked the shotgun away from Mason, and picked up the revolver from the unconscious man, expertly popping the cylinder open and dumping the bullets onto the floor. He turned to Victoria and extended a calloused, scarred hand. "Are you hurt, ma'am?" he asked, his voice returning to that gentle, low rumble. Victoria took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. His grip was strong, yet incredibly careful. I'm okay," she stammered, her knees trembling so badly she almost fell again. Who are you?" Before Ethan could answer, the wail of police sirens pierced the night, growing rapidly louder. Mr. O'Connor had tripped the silent alarm under the counter. Ethan's head snapped toward the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the wet pavement outside. A profound look of regret and anxiety washed over his face. He didn't look like a hero expecting a medal. He looked like a man who had just made a terrible mistake. "Noah," Ethan called out softly. The little boy scrambled out from under the table. Ethan scooped him up into his arms, pressing the boy's face into his shoulder. He grabbed his faded denim jacket. "Wait," Victoria said, stepping forward. "The police are here. You saved my life. You saved everyone. They'll want your statement. I want to reward you." Ethan paused at the back door of the kitchen. He looked back at her, his eyes dark and guarded. "I can't talk to the cops, lady. Tell them they slipped. Have a good life." With that, Ethan pushed open the heavy steel fire door and vanished into the freezing rain, leaving Victoria standing amid the wreckage, staring at the empty space he had just occupied. 3 days later, the high-rise executive suite of Harper Global felt more like a war room than an office. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline, a glittering testament to power and wealth, but Victoria Sterling paced the Persian rug entirely oblivious to the view. She was safe. The police had arrested Mason and his partner, charging them with armed robbery and attempted kidnapping. Victoria's PR team had buried the story of her near abduction, keeping it out of the tabloids to prevent the company's stock from tanking amid the hostile takeover rumors. But Victoria couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the dark barrel of the revolver, followed immediately by the impossible fluid violence of the man named Ethan. "I need a name, Henry," Victoria said, turning sharply toward her chief of operations, a silver-haired, ruthlessly efficient man sitting on her leather sofa. "You've had 3 days. Henry adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, looking down at a sleek tablet. "Ms. Harper, with all due respect, tracking down a civilian who fled a crime scene is usually a matter for the police. Our priority right now should be the board meeting on Friday, the proxy battle." "I don't care about the proxy battle right now," Victoria snapped, slamming her hands down on her mahogany desk. "My current head of security hid in a bulletproof SUV 3 blocks away while a man with a 6-inch rap sheet almost dragged me out the back door of a diner. I need someone who doesn't just look intimidating in a suit. I need him." Henry sighed, knowing better than to argue with Victoria when she used that tone. He tapped the screen of his tablet, and the large, flat-screen monitor mounted on the wall blinked to life. "We pulled the security footage from O'Connor's as well as the street cameras within a 4-block radius," Henry explained. "The facial recognition software had a hard time because of the lighting, but we managed a partial match. We ran it against federal databases. I had to pull some rather expensive strings at the Pentagon to bypass a firewall." Victoria crossed her arms, her eyes fixed on the screen, and a military dossier appeared on the monitor. A photograph of a younger Ethan stared back at her. In the picture, his head was shaved, his jaw set, wearing the uniform of a United States Army Special Forces operator. but the words stamped in bold red letters across the digital file made Victoria's stomach drop. Dishonorably discharged. His name is Ethan Cole, Henry read, his voice tight. He served 3 tours in Afghanistan, tier mode operator, commanded a highly specialized reconnaissance unit. His commendations are, frankly, staggering. Silver Star, 2 Purple Hearts. But 5 years ago, it all went up in smoke. Victoria walked closer to the screen, tracing the outline of Ethan's face. What happened? The file is heavily redacted, Henry noted, scrolling down. But from what I can piece together, his unit was involved in a black ops raid that resulted in severe civilian casualties and the loss of millions in untraceable operational funds. The official report blames Sullivan. It states he defied direct orders, went rogue, and compromised the mission. He was court-martialed, stripped of his rank, served 3 years in Leavenworth military prison, and lost his pension. Victoria frowned, shaking her head. No, that doesn't make sense. The military tribunal disagreed, ma'am, Henry said gently. I stood 3 feet away from him. Henry, Victoria argued, her voice rising, a man who goes rogue for money doesn't live in cheap boots and panic when he has to hand over Tom Dola. A greedy man doesn't shield his child with his own body. A coward doesn't step into the line of fire to save a total stranger. She paused, the pieces falling into place in her brilliant, analytical mind. He took the fall. Someone higher up the chain of command botched the raid, and they used a working-class soldier as a scapegoat to protect their own careers. Henry looked skeptical. Even if that's true, Victoria, he's a convicted felon, a disgraced soldier. If you hire him and the board finds out, where is he right now? Victoria interrupted her tone, leaving no room for debate. Henry sighed again, tapping his tablet. He is currently working under the table, bouncing between 3 jobs to make rent. He does overnight stock at a grocery store, day labor construction, and he cleans a boxing gym on the south side. He lives in a dilapidated apartment complex in Englewood. It's not a safe area, Victoria. Victoria turned away from the screen, walking to her private closet. She grabbed her coat. Cancel my afternoon meetings, she ordered. Tell the driver to bring the car around. Victoria, you cannot go to Englewood yourself, Henry protested, standing up. Send a courier, send a recruiter. A man like Ethan Cole doesn't respond to couriers, Victoria said, slipping her arms into her coat. He ran from the police because his record makes him a prime suspect no matter what the truth is. He lives in the shadows because society told him that's where he belongs. If I want him to trust me, I have to step into his world. Numwe Futsal, Victoria's armored Mercedes Maybach, glided to a halt in front of a crumbling graffiti-covered apartment building on the south side. The contrast of the $500,000 vehicle against the backdrop of shattered streetlights and chain-link fences was jarring. Her driver, a burly ex-cop named Grant, looked at her through the rearview mirror with deep concern. Miss Harper, I really advise against this, Grant said. Let me go up with you at least. No, Grant, stay with the car, Victoria replied, her voice firm. She stepped out into the damp, cold air. The smell of exhaust and wet concrete filled her lungs. She bypassed the broken security door and walked up 3 flights of stairs that reeked of stale beer and bleach. She found apartment Baba. The wooden door was splintered near the hinges, a makeshift deadbolt installed crudely on the outside. Victoria took a deep breath, smoothing down her coat, and knocked twice. There was no sound from inside, no footsteps, but the hairs on the back of Victoria's neck stood up. She knew with absolute certainty that he was standing right on the other side of the door, listening. Mr. Sullivan. Victoria spoke clearly, directing her voice at the peeling paint of the door. My name is Victoria Sterling. You saved my life at O'Connor's Diner. I know about Leavenworth, I know about the discharge, and I know you're innocent. Open the door. I want to give you your life back. Silence hung in the hallway, heavy and suffocating. Victoria held her breath. Slowly, with a heavy metallic click, the deadbolt turned. The wooden door swung open, revealing Ethan Sullivan. He was not wearing the faded mechanic shirt anymore, but a plain black t-shirt that stretched tight across his broad shoulders, highlighting the faded edge of a ranger's tattoo on his left bicep. His eyes were cold, assessing her, sweeping the empty hallway behind her in a fraction of a second before settling back on her face. You shouldn't be here, Miss Harper, Ethan said. His voice was low, devoid of the gentle warmth he had used with his son, replaced by the guarded edge of a man expecting a trap. Your driver in the Maybach downstairs is burning a hole in the street. You're drawing attention, and in this neighborhood, attention gets people hurt. Then let me inside, Victoria said, not breaking eye contact. 5 minutes. If you want me to leave after that, you will never see me again. Ethan stared at her for a long, heavy moment. He stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter. The apartment was small, cramped, and smelled faintly of pine sol and boiled pasta. But it was meticulously, unnervingly clean. Every book was aligned on a cheap particle board shelf. The meager furniture was positioned with geometric precision. In the corner of the small living room, Noah sat on a faded rug, quietly building a spaceship out of mismatched plastic blocks. Noah looked up, his eyes widening. "You're the lady from the diner," he whispered. Victoria offered him a soft, genuine smile, something she rarely used in corporate boardrooms. "I am. My name is Victoria." "You were very brave the other night." "Dad says bravery isn't about not being scared," Noah replied matter-of-factly. "It's about what you do when you are scared." Victoria turned back to Ethan, her respect for the man deepening. Ethan crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe of the tiny kitchen. "Clock's ticking, Ms. Harper. What do you want?" "I want to hire you," Victoria said plainly, slipping off her trench coat and draping it over a dining chair. "My grandfather built Harper Global from a single cargo ship into a Chinmui Tai Dola logistics empire. Since he passed Sao months ago, our board of directors has been trying to tear it apart and sell the pieces to a Chinese conglomerate. The man leading this hostile takeover is Charles Bancroft. He is ruthless, he is heavily connected, and as of this week, I have reason to believe he is crossing the line from corporate espionage to physical violence." "Sounds like you need the FBI, not a disgraced ex-convict," Ethan said dryly. "I need someone whose loyalty cannot be bought and whose competence is unquestionable," Victoria countered, stepping closer. "My current security team is a parade of empty suits. You disabled 2 armed assailants in seconds while protecting your son and a bystander, and I know why you have those skills, Ethan. I saw your military file." Ethan's jaw tightened. A flash of dangerous anger crossed his face, but he suppressed it instantly. Then you saw the giant red stamp across it. "I'm a felon. I legally can't even carry a firearm, let alone run security for a Fortune Numtrum CEO. The board would use my hiring to declare you mentally unfit and vote you out." "They won't know," Victoria said smoothly. "You will be hired as my executive assistant. On paper, you schedule my flights. In reality, you are my shadow. I will pay you high true dolamot num, but more importantly, I have a team of the most vicious appellate lawyers on the eastern seaboard on retainer. You agree to protect me, and I will fund a massive, relentless legal campaign to uncover what actually happened in Afghanistan. We will clear your name, Ethan. You can stop working 3 jobs. Noah can go to the best private schools in the state." The mention of his son made Ethan flinch. He looked at the boy who was happily attaching a plastic wing to his spaceship, oblivious to the high-stakes negotiation happening feet away. "You don't know what you're asking," Ethan said, his voice dropping to a whisper so Noah wouldn't hear. "The men who framed me, they aren't just bureaucrats. They are a private military contractor group called Aegis Solutions. They operate in the dark. If you dig into my past, you put a target on your own back." Victoria reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. She tossed it onto the small dining table. It landed with a heavy thud. "Aegis Solutions," Victoria said, her voice turning to ice. "I know because yesterday morning, Charles Bancroft transferred $5 million from a shell company in the Cayman Islands into an account controlled by Aegis. They aren't just the men who ruined your life, Ethan. They are the men Bancroft just hired to ensure I don't make it to the proxy vote on Friday morning." Ethan's eyes snapped from Victoria to the envelope. He stepped forward, sliding a glossy photograph out of the file. It showed a heavily scarred man in a tailored suit shaking hands with Charles Bancroft outside a Washington, D.C. steakhouse. "Major Daniel Mercer," Ethan breathed, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. "He was my commanding officer. He was the one who diverted the operational funds, ordered the strike on the civilian compound to cover his tracks, and pinned the whole damn thing on my unit. He is currently running Aegis," Victoria confirmed, "and he is currently hunting me. The board meeting is in Bon Muitam hours." If I'm alive and in that room at Chinjosang on Friday, I have the voting power to fire Bancroft, dissolve his faction, and lock Harper Global down. Kincaid's job is to make sure I have an accident before I can cast that vote." Ethan stared at the photograph of Kincaid. 5 years of suppressed rage, of prison cells, of struggling to buy his son a simple birthday dinner culminated in this single moment. The universe had not just offered him a job, it had delivered his vengeance on a silver platter. Ethan slowly slid the photograph back into the envelope. He looked at Victoria, the dead-eyed soldier fully replacing the tired father. "2 conditions," Ethan said. "First, I run the show. You don't question my tactical calls, you don't hesitate, and you don't go anywhere without my clearance. If I tell you to jump out of a moving car, you jump." "Agreed," Victoria said without hesitation. "Second," Ethan pointed a finger at her, "Kincaid is mine. When the dust settles, I get numb food alone in a room with him before the police arrive. I'm going to get my confession." Victoria looked at the absolute terrifying resolve in his eyes. She extended her hand. "Welcome to Harper Global, Mr. Sullivan." Friday morning dawned over Chicago with a brilliant freezing clarity. The sun reflected blindingly off the glass facade of the Harper Global Tower. On the 64th floor, the executive boardroom was a monument to power, built entirely of reinforced glass, steel, and imported Brazilian walnut. At Tamzo Bonmui Lum Futsang, Charles Bancroft sat at the head of the massive conference table sipping sparkling water. He was a man in his late 50s with silver hair perfectly coiffed and a custom Italian suit that cost more than a luxury sedan. He checked his Rolex, a smug, relaxed smile playing on his lips. Beside him sat 4 other board members, a cabal of executives who had sold their souls for the promise of the Chinese buyout. "I assume we haven't heard from Ms. Harper this morning?" Bancroft asked, his tone laced with feigned concern. Henry, Victoria's chief of operations, stood near the door, his face pale and sweating. "No, Charles. She hasn't answered her phone since last night. Her security detail reported she never returned to her penthouse." Bancroft sighed dramatically. A tragedy. The pressure of this company must have finally broken her. If she doesn't arrive by Chinjio, the bylaws dictate we proceed with the vote in her absence. What Bancroft knew, and Henry didn't, was that Aegis operatives had intercepted Victoria's motorcade at midnight. Kincaid had sent a text at 1 a.m., package secured, waiting for your green light. The clock on the wall ticked to Tam Junam Mui Tam Fu Sang. Bancroft adjusted his tie, ready to claim his empire. At exactly Tamzo Numui Chinfutsang, the heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open. Bancroft's smile vanished. The color drained completely from his face, leaving him looking like a wax corpse. Victoria Sterling walked into the room. She was wearing a flawless, razor-sharp midnight blue suit, her hair perfectly styled, her expression radiating absolute terrifying authority. She didn't look like a woman who had spent the night dodging mercenaries. She looked like a queen stepping up to the guillotine, holding the lever. Walking 2 paces behind her was Ethan Cole. He wore a tailored black suit that hid the ballistic vest underneath, his eyes scanning the room with the thermal intensity of a predatory drone. He carried a sleek black briefcase. "Good morning, Charles," Victoria said, her voice echoing off the glass walls. She walked to the opposite end of the table and took her seat, placing her hands flat on the polished wood. "You look surprised to see me." "Victoria!" Bancroft stammered, his mind racing, desperately trying to understand how Kincaid had failed. We were worried. "Your security—" "My old security team was compromised," Victoria interrupted sharply. "I fired them. I'd like to introduce my new executive assistant, Ethan. He's proven to be incredibly efficient." Ethan stood perfectly still behind Victoria's chair, his eyes locked onto Bancroft. He offered a slow, chilling smile. Bancroft's hand trembled as he reached under the table, his thumb pressing a hidden panic button taped to the underside of the wood, a direct signal to Kincaid's strike team waiting on the floor below. If stealth had failed, Bancroft was arrogant enough to authorize brute force. Suddenly, the lights in the boardroom flickered and died. The hum of the climate control ceased. The electronic magnetic locks on the boardroom doors engaged with a heavy, ominous clunk. Panic erupted among the other board members. Henry rushed to the doors, yanking on the handles. "They're locked. The power is cut to the whole floor." Bancroft stood up, his fear replaced by desperate rage. "This is over, Victoria. You should have stayed away. In high food, heavily armed men are going to breach that door. and they are not going to leave witnesses. I know, Victoria said calmly, not moving an inch. She didn't even blink in the dim emergency lighting. Crash. The glass wall facing the executive corridor shattered inward. 4 men dressed in black tactical gear wearing balaclavas and wielding suppressed submachine guns stepped into the boardroom. Leading them was Major John Kincaid, his scarred face twisted into a snarl. "Nobody moves." Kincaid barked, leveling his weapon directly at Victoria. "Bancroft, get out of the way. We're making this look like a murder-suicide." The board members screamed, diving under the massive table. Henry froze in terror, but Ethan didn't freeze. He had anticipated the breach. He knew Kincaid's tactics intimately because he had trained alongside him. Before Kincaid could even aim down his sights, Ethan kicked the heavy briefcase on the floor. It wasn't carrying documents. It was carrying a military-grade flashbang grenade rigged to a remote detonator. Ethan hit the button hidden in his palm and yelled, "Victoria, down!" Victoria threw herself to the floor. Bang! A blinding flash of white light and a concussive boom rocked the room, temporarily deafening and blinding everyone. In the chaos, Ethan moved. He didn't just fight. He systematically dismantled Kincaid's team with the terrifying precision of a machine. He slipped through the smoke, entirely silent. He grabbed the barrel of the first mercenary submachine gun, ripping it from his grip while simultaneously driving a knee into the man's sternum, snapping his ribs. The man collapsed, gasping for air. The second mercenary swung blindly. Ethan ducked the blow, pivoting his hips and delivering a devastating palm strike to the man's throat, incapacitating him instantly, without lethal force. The third man managed to clear his vision just in time to see Ethan flying through the air. Ethan locked his legs around the man's neck in a flying triangle choke, bringing them both to the floor. Within Bagay, the mercenary was unconscious. The entire engagement took less than Moy Jay. As the smoke cleared, Kincaid stood alone, coughing, blinking rapidly to clear the spots from his eyes. When his vision focused, he saw his 3 elite operators motionless on the floor. And standing directly in front of him, holding the confiscated submachine gun pointed safely at the floor, was the ghost of his past. "Hello, Jack," Ethan whispered. Kincaid's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated horror. "Sullivan, it's impossible. You're in a cage." "I got out," Ethan said, taking a slow step forward. "Drop the gun, Jack." Kincaid, driven by panic, tried to raise his weapon. Ethan moved faster. He stepped inside Kincaid's guard, stripped the weapon with a violent twist of his wrist, and drove a solid right hook into Kincaid's jaw. The major crashed into the glass table, shattering the surface, and fell to the floor, bleeding from his mouth. Ethan stood over him, his boot pressed heavily onto Kincaid's chest, pinning him down. The room was dead silent save for the whimpering of Bancroft in the corner. Victoria slowly stood up, dusting off her suit, her composure entirely unshaken. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, blinking digital recorder. He leaned down, his face inches from Kincaid's. 5 years, Jack," Ethan said, his voice trembling with a rage he had held back for half a decade. 5 years away from my son. Tell me about the Kandahar raid. Tell me about the money, or I promise you I will break every single bone in your body, starting with your fingers." Kincaid looked up at the terrifying emptiness in Ethan's eyes. He knew Sullivan. He knew this man did not make empty threats. Okay. Kincaid spat out blood. "It was me. I took the payout from the warlord. I ordered the airstrike on the village to wipe the ledger, and I doctored the comms logs to make it look like you gave the order. Just don't kill me, Tommy." Ethan pressed the stop button on the recorder. He took a deep breath, the massive, crushing weight of a 5-year lie finally lifting off his shoulders. He stepped back, holstering the recorder. "I'm not a murderer, Jack," Ethan said coldly. "That was your job." Suddenly, the wail of police sirens echoed from the streets far below, growing rapidly louder. Henry, shaking uncontrollably, pulled a satellite phone from his pocket. I triggered the silent alarm the moment the lights went out, Victoria, just like you told me to." Yeah. Victoria walked over to the corner where Charles Bancroft was cowering, gripping his knees. She looked down at him with an expression of pure disgust. "You lost, Charles," Victoria said softly. "The FBI is coming up the elevators right now. They have the wire transfers. They have Kincaid. And they have you on charges of domestic terrorism and attempted murder." Bancroft buried his face in his hands, sobbing. Victoria turned to Ethan. The adrenaline was finally beginning to fade, replaced by a profound mutual respect. The disgraced soldier and the billionaire CEO had walked into a firestorm and emerged entirely untouched. "Are you okay?" Victoria asked, her voice returning to a softer human tone. Ethan looked at the flashing red and blue lights reflecting against the boardroom windows, signaling the end of his nightmare. He thought of Noah, safe at home with a trusted neighbor, completely unaware that his father's name was finally clear. Ethan offered Victoria a small, genuine smile. "I am now, boss." What an incredible story of resilience, strategy, and ultimate justice. From a terrifying diner robbery to a high-stakes corporate siege, Ethan proved that true heroes don't wear capes. They stay calm under pressure and fight for what's right. Victoria and Ethan's brilliant checkmate against corruption shows that truth always prevails. If you were on the edge of your seat during this jaw-dropping true story, hit that like button, share this with your friends, and subscribe for more amazing real-life twists. Yeah. Hi, my name is Hidden Princess, the owner and manager of Hidden Princess. After watching the video, CEO watched a single dad stay calm during a robbery. His next move stunned everyone. I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stood out to me most was seeing how calm and protective Ethan remained when everything around him fell apart. His actions reminded me that real strength often comes from keeping a clear mind and putting the people you love first, even in the hardest moments. What was the moment that stayed with you the longest? Do you think staying calm can really change the outcome of a difficult situation? Maybe it's something we can all remember the next time life throws us an unexpected challenge. Thanks so much for spending part of your day with us. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like this, feel free to like and subscribe for more.